several while trying to collect food aid. The conflict between Iran and Israel appears to be getting more intense as both sides are hitting each other with waves of missiles and drones. After Israel triggered the conflict on Friday, air raid sirens have been heard across Israel. Its military says Iran launched more missiles towards its territory. They targeted multiple cities on Saturday night, with Bat Yam being hit the hardest. Rescue teams continue to search for survivors in the Tel Aviv suburb. At least 14 Israelis have been killed in the last 3 days of conflict. The Israeli military says it's attacked an aircraft at the airport in Iran's northeastern city of Mashhad. The army says it struck a refueling plane and has described it as the most long-range strike since the start of its attack. Mashhad is the second most populous city in Iran. Now, there were also explosions in the Iranian capital throughout the day. A number of strikes hit central Tehran, including near government buildings. Israel says it struck the Defense Ministry tower. Iran's intelligence agency says it's arrested 2 people accused of carrying out acts of sabotage in the country. At least 110 people have been killed in Iran since Friday. Now, roads in the capital have been clogged with traffic as people try to leave Tehran. The road connecting the city to northern Iran is particularly busy, and there's been long queues at petrol stations as well. There's also been an increase in strikes on the capital on Sunday, which have at times hit residential buildings. Osama bin Javed has this report.
Another morning of explosions across Iran, this one during rush hour in the central city of Isfahan. The provincial headquarters of the Ministry of Defense was struck by Israel. Plumes of smoke are rising from oil facilities in Shiraz and the capital, Tehran. It's day 3 of Israel's attacks. And Iran's top diplomat is warning of further retaliation if Israel doesn't stop.
It is a response to the Israeli attacks and violations. Once these attacks stop, we will reciprocate. We were engaged in rounds of negotiations with the US. The 6th round of talks was supposed to be held in Oman. The Zionist entity is not willing to see us reaching an agreement or a diplomatic solution with the United States.
Overnight, Iran struck Israel with multiple waves of missiles and drones. There were several direct hits on the cities of Haifa and Tel Aviv. Israeli citizens were told to seek shelter through the night as Iran and Yemen responded to Israel's attacks. Israel's advanced air defense systems could not stop all the rockets and missiles. Many in Iran support the government's retaliatory strikes.
They used to call us terrorists. So what? Now even America and Britain should fear us. Let them be scared.
We are not really scared. We are more worried for our children. We belong to a generation of war. We are not scared of such incidents.
On Saturday, Israel launched more attacks targeting Iran's critical energy infrastructure. As night fell, an oil depot near the capital, Tehran, was hit and caught fire. Satellite images revealed the impact of Israel's earlier strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. As missiles continue to land in both countries, calls by international leaders for calm have not been able to halt the conflict. Casualties, Al Jazeera.
Well, Tahir Asadi has more on the latest from the Tehran.
Across the country, so far we have received reports about different targets being hit in different cities of the country. From the early morning, we received targets being hit in Isfahan, a military base that belongs to the Ministry of Defense, something that we are expecting some casualties from which. And also we received reports about strikes in Shiraz and other cities of Iranian cities indeed. But still speaking of the capital, a few hours ago we saw a new round of strikes, Israeli strikes into the town town, and in the northern part, in the western part, and in the eastern part, we saw explosion sounds, some of them very massive, being heard across the city, and then later it resulted in smoke coming and pouring into the air as a result of that. But also in the downtown, we have reports about explosions happening in Talagani Street and Valley Astor Square. These are critically important locations because they are near very important government buildings, and that means that in downtown there are also strikes taking place. Also in the southern parts of Tehran, from the early morning, we are seeing heavy smoke, thick smoke pouring into the air, which is the result of a target of a fuel depot being targeted by the Israeli strike, which took place at the very early hours of morning. But right now, if you look at the skies in the southern parts of Tehran, you will see this towering cloud of smoke that emerges behind the skies. And this is what we have so far in terms of the realities on the ground.
Okay, well, let's go to Bernard Smith, who's live for us in the Jordanian capital Amman, and he's there because the Israeli government has banned Al Jazeera from reporting inside of Israel and occupied West Bank. Bernard, we've been seeing more sirens and people running for shelter in Israel. Do we know what's the latest in terms of the casualties, but also the damage?
Sarah, there were sirens earlier this afternoon, Sunday afternoon, in northern Israel. The military said that missiles that came in on that wave of attacks were destroyed, and there were no hits on the ground. There was, though, significant damage after Iranian missiles hit targets across Israel overnight. That's in Saturday night into the early hours of Sunday morning. Israel's Prime Minister's office says 22 targets, locations were hit. There is military censorship in Israel in wartime, as there would be in most other countries in a time of war. So the media there is not allowed to reveal the exact locations of where some of those missiles have hit. The ones that you see on television, the ones that you're seeing on the video, are those that it's impossible to hide what's happened because they're in residential areas. But whether there are any other targets, such as military installations, sensitive sites have been hit, it's not easy to tell. We know that Haifa port has suffered some damage, although the Israelis say refining is continuing there. But there have been casualties, particularly 4 women were killed in the Palestinian-Israeli town of Tamra, and 7 people, including 2 children, were killed in a direct hit on a residential building in Bat Yam. That means 14 people have been killed since Iran first started firing missiles into Israel in retaliation for Israel's attack. Also, Rishon LeZion, a city south of Tel Aviv, that's also been hit. And to give you an indication of how serious foreign governments are taking what's happening in Israel now, the British government has been the latest to advise its citizens against all travel to Israel. The French did similarly a couple of days ago. The US hasn't done that yet. It's on level 3 out of 4 levels in terms of warning about security in Israel, but an indication there of how serious foreign governments are reviewing the ongoing situation in Israel.
Yeah, so a real concern for there, and you were talking about those flights being cancelled. Some of those that have been trying to get out of Israel have been doing so through the border via Jordan. So regional countries, what are they doing about the situation, for example, where you are?
Well, regional countries are sort of sandwiched, almost powerless really, between Israel and Iran. Here in Amman, we have sirens when the airspace is infiltrated because the missiles that are fired from Iran come this way over Jordanian airspace. The Jordanian Air Force, and sometimes perhaps the Israeli military as well, try and intercept some of those missiles, but the sirens go off here. People are ordered to instructed to take shelter. But there's little countries like Jordan, Iraq, Syria, there's little they can do, but the consequences for them are significant. Jordan particularly, because it's having to frequently close and then reopen its airspace, it's now opened again. is losing enormous amounts of money from the peak tourism season. Hotels are emptying out. People aren't able to travel here. Israel is worth mentioning. Ben Gurion Airport is closed currently indefinitely. That, as far as we can work out, is the longest Ben Gurion has been closed in many decades. It's been closed previously for like a day or so during wars in Gaza with rockets that have come from Gaza, but such a lengthy closure is having a real impact on Israelis as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Bernard Smith, for just updating us there on the latest, certainly what's coming out of Israel. Now, Rosalind joins us live from Washington, D.C. Rosalind, we've been hearing once again from Donald Trump. What's he been saying on this?
The U.S. president took to his social media platform on Sunday morning to say that there can be a peace deal, my words, not his, between Iran and Israel, and he indicated that there is a lot of behind-the-scenes talking and meeting to try to make that happen, but there is no on-the-record confirmation of exactly what meetings and conversations are taking place by the Trump administration. Earlier, the U.S. president had said that while he knew that the Israelis were planning to launch these attacks on Iran on Friday, that the U.S. was not going to be actively involved in this conflict between the two countries. The U.S. president ran on a platform of not getting the U.S. involved militarily in other countries' affairs, and certainly he has removed at least one person from his cabinet, his former national security advisor, who apparently was trying to work towards such an intervention, basically saying to others on his staff that if you're not with my policy, you cannot work for me.
And are there any other voices within the Trump administration asking the president to avoid being involved?
I'm not aware of any other persons raising this as a U.S. being offensively involved as opposed to defensively. I don't think that you would find any dispute among those within the administration who would argue against the U.S. not defending itself against an Iranian attack, and that message has already gone out from the Trump administration. There are also those in Congress who believe that while the U.S. should be defending Israel, there are others who are saying they should be more concerned about defending U.S. Military interests in the region, that if Iran were to make good on its threat to attack U.S. military forces anywhere in the Middle East, that the U.S. has the right to self-defense.
Okay, thank you very much. That's the latest view, Rosalind Jordan there in Washington, D.C. Now, Iran has said it doesn't want to expand the conflict. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says that Tehran is acting in self-defense and will de-escalate as soon as Israel stops its strikes. He says Israel attacked Iran to prevent a nuclear agreement with the U.S.
It is a response to the Israeli attacks. It is a response to the Israeli violation. Once these attacks come to a stop, we will naturally reciprocate. We were engaged in rounds of negotiations with the United States of America. The sixth round of talks were supposed to be held in Oman, and we were supposed to present a counter proposal on tomorrow's meeting. Our proposal could have opened doors for an all-out agreement with the Americans. The Zionist entity is not willing to see us reaching an agreement or a diplomatic solution with the United States.
Ali Akbar Darani is a researcher with the Center for Strategic Studies, and he says that Iran has had to retaliate against Israel in order to stop its aggression.
It's now very clear that the Israeli war of aggression against Iran has nothing to do with Iran's nuclear program. They are using Iran's nuclear program as a pretext to wage a war, and their aim is regime change and topple the ruling system, hoping that their actions will lead to some Iranians protesting in the streets, and that the ruling system is going to collapse from within. That is a big huge miscalculation. It has not happened. It's not going to happen. It has become very clear that Netanyahu is the Adolf Hitler of the 21st century, and he has sold war to the Trump administration without logistical support from the US, without diplomatic, intelligence support, and military support from the US. Israel would have never been able to carry out such an attack against Iran. But Iran is now pretty determined to make sure that Israel will pay a price. This is so simple. If Israel does not pay a very heavy price, it will not stop. So Iran has to make Israel to change its calculations and stop this aggression. And the only way is to inflict unbearable pain on Israel. Now that Israel has attacked Iran's economic infrastructure, oil refineries, Iran has no option but to retaliate. And Israel has few key economic infrastructures. If they are destroyed, Israel will go into darkness, and Iran is pretty sure to do that. Iran suffered an intelligence setback only because Israel was able to smuggle mini drones and ammunition into Iran, and now infiltrators are using those mini drones in a dirty terrorist technique against civilian areas, against residential areas, to create chaos. This is part of their coordinated plan to create chaos in Iran. Iran has made good progress in cracking down, but still there is a way to go. Iran is out of shock. There is now a clear plan to retaliate in kind and make sure that the Israeli plan is going to fail. This war is going to backfire. They are not going to achieve their goals. Now it has become very clear that the Americans had no real intention of making a deal with them. Iran was honest. Iran was open to negotiations for a deal. And that deal was Iran will accept limitations in its uranium enrichment program. And for the lifting of sanctions, there will be no weaponization, and we have a deal. This is what the Americans talked about at the very beginning. Their red line was weaponization, but they changed their position into zero enrichment, and that is the Israeli agenda for war.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Iran will pay a very heavy price after at least 6 people, including 2 children, were killed in a missile attack on Bet Yam, that's near Tel Aviv.
Our soldiers, our pilots are over the Iranian skies. Iran will pay a heavy price for the international killing of civilians, women and children. We will both achieve our goals and strike them. We will deliver a crushing blow. They will feel our might.
Right, well, Meron Rapaport is an editor and writer at Local Call, an Israeli news site, joining us once again from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Meron, for your time. What's the situation where you are? Because we've been seeing all of these missiles, and how are the public reacting to all of this?
I think the public is quite tense. Tel Aviv, for example, was quite paralyzed. Today, very few people in the streets. There was an alarm a few hours ago, 2 hours ago. People expect another attack in the evening, as we've seen in the last 2 nights. The pictures are quite impressive from the destruction in Bat Yam and in Ramat Gan the day before. People are quite concerned, but they still, I think, generally speaking, support the Israeli action.
I just wanted to talk about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his comments, because he's been speaking to a US media outlet, and he said a few things, including that regime change in Iran could be a result of what we're doing. Is that really the aim here? He doesn't seem to be hiding it anymore, almost. And what does he or Israel benefit from a change in leadership in Iran?
Netanyahu is talking about a regime change for many years. It's not new, and of course, with this attack, He probably thinks that this is the moment. Whether that's the case, we really don't know. It doesn't depend on him. We didn't see really regime change coming from the war from the outside. In Iraq, we have seen a regime change after the US has occupied the whole of Iraq. And this is not the case here. Israel is not going to occupy Iran. Of course, Israel is hoping that a new regime in Iran will be more sympathetic to it and less dangerous. But I think it's more of a slogan than a real working plan.
I mean, can that ever be possible? We know that across the region there is support for Palestinians with Israeli occupation continuing. Even if there was a leadership change, that situation could change.
Yes, I'm not sure that Netanyahu goes into these details. We have seen that paradoxically, the more democratic the states in the region are, the less sympathetic they are to Israel. Turkey is an example vis-a-vis the Gulf states, which are less democratic. So I don't know. I'm not sure that this will play into the hands of Israel if Iran will be democratic. But yes, I think for the moment this is a big slogan. The regime in Iran is portrayed as the big Satan, as the source of all evil in the Middle East and maybe even in the world. And Netanyahu seems to himself, I think, as kind of a crusader who is fighting this evil regime for the sake of the people of Israel and for the sake of the Western world.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ron Rappaport there for your time.
Thank you.
Well, there's mounting concern that these attacks between Iran and Israel could turn into a wider regional conflict. As that threat looms, our defense editor Alex Kotopoulos takes a closer look at the military might of both countries.
This phase of the conflict between Israel and Iran is being fought with specific weapons. Israel's main offensive capability is its air force of 340 combat-capable aircraft, made up of advanced F-15 and F-16 fighter planes and at least 45 F-35 stealth jets. Aircraft firing air-launched missiles and dropping bunker-buster bombs have been the main weapons used. Israel says its special forces teams within Iran have also been launching explosive drones at targets, aiming to kill senior military leaders and other key figures and destroy air defense sites. Iran also has a missile and drone force. Despite dozens of drones being launched, they're easily being shot down by Israel's air defenses and squadrons of jets. But its missile force is large and powerful. Long-range cruise missiles like the Pave and Sumar have ranges up to 2,500 kilometers, can fly under radar cover. A large supply of modern solid-fueled missiles like the Casualties means that they can be launched within minutes, making interception by Israeli fighter jets less likely. Although they're limited in number, Iran's hypersonic missiles like the Fateh-1 and Fateh-2 can travel up to 15 times the speed of sound, and that's 18,500 kilometers an hour. These missiles are the most likely to penetrate Israel's powerful air defense
With the price
network.
of just about everything going up, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we've
to make a nuclear weapon. But what hasn't been mentioned so far is Israel's own arsenal of at least 90 nuclear weapons and the long-range Jericho-3 ballistic missiles that would deliver them.
Now, Doug Bandeau is a senior fellow at the Cato Institute and says President Donald Trump is unlikely to increase U.S. involvement in Israel's attack on Iran.
I don't see an easy solution here. Both sides have to back away. Iran is not going to surrender. Israel doesn't want to acknowledge that it's failed in its desire to destroy the nuclear program. Both of them could keep fighting each other for quite some time. It's long been believed that only the United States could try to reach the deepest of the facilities that Iran has. But that would be a dramatic step from President Trump. You know, he has criticized endless wars in the Middle East. He criticized President Bush over the Iraq debacle. Much of his own base does not want to see a war there. Even some of the hawks want to focus on Asia, not the Middle East. And I suspect he understands that a step into that war will draw attention away from domestic policy issues that he wants to focus on. So this is a very difficult choice for the Trump administration. All the polls indicate that the American public leans towards Israel and kind of wanting them to defend themselves, but that a majority of Americans want nothing to do with entering them. The American people really are tired of fighting wars in the Middle East. They don't think it's in America's interest. I think his administration is also split. He has people in that administration who lean very strongly towards Israel, probably would like to get involved to help Israel, but he also has a number of people who are much more skeptical, and it's believed that that skepticism is why he replaced his first national security advisor, Mike Waltz. Well, the timing is certainly very suspicious. That is that there were still discussions going on between the United States and Iran. The possibility of a negotiated settlement was there, and then Iran had not taken any steps irrevocably towards nuclear weapons. So by starting the war, Israel has made it very difficult for Iran to come back to negotiations. It would be perceived as a surrender. So I think that was probably one of the objectives, at least in the timing of the Israeli action.
An Israeli strike has hit a residential area in central Gaza. Palestinians desperately run for cover in Gaza's Brink refugee camp following the attack on Sunday. Now, the strike injured several people and damaged much of the area's infrastructure. Civilians there have been repeatedly targeted by Israeli forces in recent days. At least 59 Palestinians have been killed so far on Sunday. 17 of them were trying to collect food. Hunger is driving people to aid distribution points, but Israeli gunfire is pushing many of them back. Access to food and water is limited across the Strip, and much of the remaining food distribution is carried out by the US and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has been accused of weaponizing aid. Hind Khodri is live for us in Deir al-Balah with more on these attacks. Hind, there's been another Israeli attack since the Brink one. Can you tell us more on what you're hearing?
Well, the Israeli forces launched an attack on one of the houses in Al-Nusayrat refugee camp. This house is for Al-Ghurab family, where at least 13 Palestinians have been killed. Now, what we know so far is there were a lot of families that were displaced and seeking refuge in that house. There are from different families, and among those who have been killed are a lot of women and children. But what we need to know that there are a lot of Palestinians still struck under the debris, where rescue teams are doing their job and trying their best to rescue as much Palestinians as possible. They believe that there are still Palestinians still alive under the rubble. But what we also need to know is these rescue teams are working with zero equipment because there is no heavy machinery, and they are actually digging with their bare hands. Now, this was not the only attack. The Israeli forces also launched an attack on one of the graveyards in Nusayrat also, and there has been continuous attacks in the south and the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. But this is not the only attacks against Palestinians since the morning, where the Israeli forces also opened fire on 17 aid seekers that were killed as they were trying to approach the distribution point in the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And this has been happening every single day since these distribution started operating in the south, in the middle area, and also in the north. But Palestinians are saying that they do not have any other choices because the Israeli forces are not letting any other UN agencies or NGOs distribute food, and what trucks that are entering are very limited. The Palestinians do not have any other choice. Most of them are saying that they either get killed from the live ammunition as they are approaching food, or they're gonna die from the forced starvation that is imposed on them.
Okay, thank you very much, Hind Khodri. That's the latest update there from Gaza. Now, Ukrainian officials say they've received the bodies of 1,200 soldiers from Russia, and it's part of an agreement reached earlier this month during talks in Turkey. Russian state media says it's handed back nearly 5,000 bodies overall, but Ukraine hasn't reciprocated. Ukraine's defense minister insists 4,812 bodies have been returned to Russia this week. Asad Bey has more from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv.
Russia has handed over 1,200 bodies of Ukrainians. Now, Russia has said that Ukraine has not stuck to its side of the agreement, but we haven't heard anything official from the Ukrainians as to counter those claims. Now, this agreement came out of the negotiations that took place in Istanbul on June the 2nd. In fact, President Zelensky said that the only thing that came out of those negotiations was this agreement to hand over 6,000 bodies of Russians and Ukrainians, as well as prisoners. Now, Russia says it's handed over 4,000 bodies to the Ukrainians, and President Zelensky says that he anticipates these swaps to continue until around the 20th or the 21st of June. But for the Ukrainian families here that are hoping for closure, well, it will take time, the Ukrainians say, to identify those bodies as they continue forensic checks on those bodies. As for the prisoner swaps, the Ukrainians have been quiet about the numbers, they say, for security reasons, but some of those prisoners, we understand, were captured at the start of the war and have spent years in Russian captivity. Elsewhere in the country, Ukraine says that they continue to shoot down Russian drones and missiles overnight, intercepting most of them, but also the Russians have been making small advances in the east of the country as well as Sumy, according to the Russians, although it's very difficult to independently verify those claims. Asad Bey, Al Jazeera, Kyiv, Ukraine.
Oh, well, before we go, let's
We're
just
usually
do a real
big
quick
planners.
recap of our
But
top
for my
story,
birth
the
plan,
ongoing
I
conflict
just
between
put my
Israel
trust in
and
Providence,
Iran,
Sweden.
because both countries are threatening escalation. The countries have been attacking each other with waves of missiles. Israeli strikes on Iran have killed more than 110 people, including women and children. That's it from me. 101 East is next.
We will not allow federal agents to be attacked, and we will not allow an American city to be invaded and conquered by a foreign enemy.
The administration of Donald Trump is determined to carry out its signature initiative, rounding up and deporting undocumented workers and migrants.
A very peaceful protest ongoing a few blocks away from where we are. We're being asked to leave by the police. We're going. Listen, you don't have to threaten us. We're fine. We're just doing our work. We're just doing our work.
The sun may have faded, but the anger against Donald Trump, against ICE, only growing. And nobody knows how much longer this will go on.
The film industry in India's southern state of Kerala is booming, delivering 200 productions a year. Its movies are known and loved for their bold stories. But behind the scenes lies a dark side, with reports of widespread exploitation.
And slowly he started touching my hand and all. Then the whole thing was happened after that.
When a famous actor was accused of planning the abduction and assault of a female colleague, it sent shockwaves through the film industry. The revelations that followed exposed a disturbing secret: rampant sexual harassment in an industry cloaked in silence.
If people come forward with the specific complaints, then law will take its course.
But while the accused remain in the limelight, many survivors face professional exile, their careers cut short for seeking justice.
പിന്നെ ഞാൻ അവിടെ ഭയങ്കര പ്രശ്നക്കാരിയാണെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് എന്നെ അവിടെ നിന്ന് പുറത്താക്കാറുണ്ടായത്.
101 East explores how women in the film industry in Kerala are challenging impunity and fighting for justice. A couple of hours from the city of Kochi in Kerala, a film set comes to life. Kerala's Malayalam language film industry is renowned among cinema lovers for its high-quality films, often featuring progressive and unconventional themes. But the industry's reputation has taken a hit, with reports of widespread sexual harassment. Dozens of women, mostly actors, have spoken out against several big names in the industry.
One of the cases that shook the Malayalam film industry was when a young, aspiring actress accused a top Malayali actor of sexual abuse. She alleges that the incident took place in the hotel behind me when she was just 21 years old. The actor at the time was in his 50s.
Today, we're meeting the actress at her lawyer's office. For legal reasons, we cannot reveal her identity, so we'll call her Priya. A trained singer who began her career in modeling, Priya's real love was the movies. She came to the industry with wide-eyed enthusiasm, but her excitement soon turned to shock. She says it began with a friend request on Facebook from one of the industry's best-known actors, Siddiq. A household name, he starred in hundreds of films.
For me, that
film. Later, he asked her to meet him at
Will Russia, Turkey and China threat? Iran, for its part, has responded with a barrage of retaliatory attacks while insisting that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. But now, with the two sides launching missiles and drones at each other, what role can the global community play? China, Russia and Turkey have condemned Israel's actions and called for diplomacy. Beijing and Moscow maintain economic and political ties with both Iran and Israel. So, what, if anything, can these powers do to end the conflict? That is, there a shift in dynamics in the region? We'll put that to our guests in just a moment. But first, Imogen Kimber reports.
Israel continues to target Iran. And Iran is returning fire, hitting Tel Aviv and other cities. As the battle intensifies, major global and regional powers, including China, Russia and Turkey, have spoken out against Israel, who initiated the conflict.
Vladimir Putin condemned Israel's military operation against Iran and expressed serious concern about a possible escalation of the conflict, which would have unpredictable consequences for the entire situation in the Middle East.
Russia backed Iran in supporting Syria's former leader Bashar al-Assad, and it sees Iran as a counterbalance to US influence in the Middle East. But Moscow also has ties with Israel. After calling the Iranian and Israeli leaders, Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke to US President Donald Trump. Both agreed that negotiations on Iran's nuclear program should continue. There was also a phone call between the Chinese and Israeli foreign ministers, in which China said Israel violated Iran's sovereignty. China has ties with Israel and Iran. Tehran is part of China's Belt and Road project, and Beijing is one of Israel's biggest trading partners.
The sudden escalation of the regional situation does not serve the interests of any party. The Chinese side calls on relevant parties to take actions that promote regional peace and stability and to avoid further escalation of tensions. The Chinese side is willing to play a constructive role in easing the situation.
Turkey, which is a major critic of Israeli policies, said its actions show a disregard for international law, and that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is dragging the region and the world into disaster. While Russia, Turkey and China have not pledged any military support for Iran so far, their economic and political ties mean they may have a vested interest in trying to maintain the current balance of power. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. From Ankara, we're joined by Barin Kayaoğlu, Chair and Assistant Professor of American Studies at the Social Sciences University of Ankara. From Boston, we're joined by Glenn Kyle, career CIA Officer and Deputy National Intelligence Officer for Transnational Threats from the National Intelligence Council. And from Moscow, we're joined by Nikolai Sukhov, who's assistant professor at Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Welcome to you all, gentlemen. Nikolai, let's start with you. There's much wringing of hands and condemnation of Israel's attacks on Iran in Moscow, Ankara and Beijing, but all three nations are in a difficult position, aren't they? Particularly Russia, which has good relations with both Israel and Iran. It considers Iran a strategic ally. What might be the Kremlin's thinking right now?
Well, we have a variety of opinions in Moscow right now. Some politicians and policy experts are already warning that the West is changing the equilibrium in the Middle East, the balance in the Middle East, and that this is a Western conspiracy to destroy Russia's main ally in this region. This is one opinion. But more pragmatic people say that we should wait and see. And of course, there is need to support Iran to prevent regime change and major destabilization. But after all, well, Russia's position was always that this war is not Russia's war. And I think this approach is still maintained by the Russian leadership, though of course under the current conditions Russia will do its best to prevent further escalation. By the way, this is our major concern, that due to the hostilities there might be a spillover that will affect Russian position in the Caspian Sea, and that will affect, of course, the situation in the Gulf. And some people say that in the short run Russia will win because oil prices will increase, but in the long term, if Iran falls, if it becomes a failed state, or if it survives but has to undergo regime change, that it will be a problem for Russia, because Iran is an important part of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Iran is an important player in the BRICS, and Iran is one of the countries that promote the idea of a multipolar world. So for Russia, it's a very serious problem. But in the meantime, Russia is also very careful not to alienate Israel completely, because we have very good chemistry between the leadership. And in the previous decade, for example, Israel was one of the major Russian partners in the Middle East, at least in the economic domain. So it's a very difficult balancing game that Russia is trying to play, and Russia is sincerely trying to achieve some kind of a political solution.
All right, but what about Turkey? A NATO member, of course. Iran and Turkey have long viewed each other's activities with suspicion. Their relationship has been marked by cycles of competition and cooperation. Will this support, this tacit support that Turkey has given, at least verbally, evolve beyond anything more than words and back-channel diplomatic support for its neighbor?
I very much doubt that, Andrew. First of all, thank you for having me on the program. I very much doubt that Turkey will give any material support, especially of the military variant, to Iran. At best, in my analyses and reports, both for public consumption and more confidential sorts for clients and whatnot, I always use the word frenemy for Turkey and Iran, a portmanteau term for the combined friend and enemy. On the one hand, they are close trading partners. In the past, before the massive sanctions on Iran's hydrocarbon industry, Turkey was a very good customer of Iran's oil and gas industries and would sell a lot of goods and services to Iran, and Iranian tourists are often among the top 5 visitors to Turkey because they don't need a visa to visit here. On the other hand, these two countries have been very serious competitors, geopolitical competitors in the region, especially in Iraq, but especially in Syria. And since the fall of the Assad regime back in December, there has been some coldness, if you will, between Ankara and Tehran. Tehran, of course, is very upset for having lost one of its key critical allies / proxies in the region. And of course, Turkey, the Erdogan government, is in a very good place for having allowed one of its clients, one of its proxies in Syria to have taken over Syria. That's not to say that Turkey is gloating about Iran's woes in any way, shape, or form. As earlier in the report, President Erdogan's tweets made it very clear that Turkey is very vehemently opposed to Israel's action, and there is a concern that given Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's statements in the past, the Israeli government may be opting not only to degrade Iran's nuclear program, but to catalyze, if you will, a regime change, a massive regime change, possibly a violent one within Iran itself, which is completely against Turkish interests.
Glenn, I'll get your thoughts on both Russia and Turkey in just a moment, but first, to what extent does China stand to be this conflict's biggest geopolitical loser? Has Iran somehow served as a vehicle for China's foreign policy in the Middle East region? What would it mean for China if there was regime change in Tehran?
Yeah, well, at present, China, and in particular, is shaping up to be the big loser in the changes occurring here. China's interests are to have access to low-cost fossil fuels, petroleum, and strategically to strengthen the anti-Western or alternative to Western norms, the normative international system, in favor of a sphere of influence one where China, Russia, the United States, respectively, and other powers have more influence instead of deferring to or trying to adhere to the supposed post-war norms. So in that sense, what's happening is not good for China or Russia strategically, although if oil prices go up, then in a more immediate sense, it's a challenge for them also.
All right. Nikolai, I just wanted to
farm in the wild,
on what
raise animals and harvest crops, make food for yourself and for sale.
Pragmatists that are possibly coming out on top. Iran, of course, provided Russia with weapons for its war in Ukraine. Do you foresee circumstances in which Russia would do the same for Iran, or would Russia really abandon Iran to stand on its own? That the wide-ranging treaty that the two countries signed at the beginning of the year, didn't include any sort of military alliance or impose any obligations on either side. Is Iran just too politically inconvenient at the moment for Russia, isolated as it still is from the West?
Well, I would say that there are no military obligations, as far as I know, under the treaty. But this treaty was supposed to really expand strategic partnership. When I speak about strategic partnership, I mean deeper economic ties, much greater trade volume, and etc., including cultural ties. Because Russia-Iran relations were always unbalanced. We had a serious political cooperation, but there were problems in the economic domain. Now we were trying to balance that. But if you speak about Russia's attitude at the moment, well, as you can see, Russia was trying to improve relations with the West, especially with the US. And Russia never wanted to undermine its relations with Israel. Even, after Israel transferred Patriot systems to the Ukraine, Russia was very careful not to criticize it very intensively. So now I believe that Russia will not provide immediate military support to Iran. But in the future, when the war is over, and if this government remains at power, Russia will definitely participate in the reconstruction economically, and Russia might provide some assistance to the Iranians in terms of rebuilding their military potential as well. Some Russian MPs were already mentioning supplies of air defenses, but it will not be an immediate support anyhow. Because right now Russia is trying to find some political solutions, as I said previously.
Barin, what threats and opportunities does this conflict present for Turkish foreign policy? Would Turkey perhaps seize the opportunity, if there is regime change in Iran, or if the conflict escalates, to become the regional player, if supposing that Iran completely loses its current leverage within the region?
Absolutely. Although, while that might appear as an opportunity for Ankara in the short term, that might appear to be so, in its foreign policy, especially in the last 6-7 years, bracketing Syria, with the exception of Syria, Turkish foreign policy has been rather conservative, I would say. And in general, Turkey has always been very, very skeptical about the notion of forceful regime change in its backyard from abroad. Since the rise of the Arab Spring in 2011, we have witnessed this on multiple occasions, and going back to 2003 with the U.S. occupation of Iraq. Any forceful regime change, especially that from abroad in Iraq and Syria and Libya, has always posed a geopolitical risk for Turkey. So there might be some opportunities in the immediate run, but if there is a regime collapse in Iran and there is an extended period of tumult in Iran, and we face this sort of undocumented immigration of the similar to the one we saw in Syria during the course of that country's 14-year civil war, then that would be a much bigger problem for Turkey. My sense is that, and my reading and my conversations here in Ankara, to me, show that there's much skepticism about the notion of regime change and in Iran. And as far as the Turkish government is concerned, the two sides would rather, and the United States and Russia and hopefully China would rather put a lid on this.
Glenn, to what extent has Israel's action forced Russia, China, and Turkey together?
Well, it does push them closer together. I mean, they are allies of more than convenience, but essentially because they oppose what they characterize as U.S. hegemony and the Western normative system, which they find constraining and intrusive in their domestic affairs and, for that matter, their foreign policy affairs. So Israel's attack on Iran has just strengthened what are the reasons for their friendship already. Now, I think both of our colleagues have made good points that neither country, Russia nor China, has an interest in overtly and strongly taking actions by providing weapons or any other action to Iran. Their interests are in being more subtle, and which is what they are, trying diplomatically to decry and to stop destabilization, which war always brings, or regime change. Whereas regime change, I think, really is, from the Israeli strategic perspective, and arguably from the American one, the only solution long term to the problem of Iran. Destroying facilities, as Israel has been doing, buys immediate and medium-term improvement from Israel's perspective, but doesn't change the nature of the strategic challenge or objectives of the Iranian regime. Now, whether that will happen and whether that would bring catastrophe, we don't know, but a change of regime is always an alarming situation, because no one can really manage that kind of thing very well.
Glenn, to what extent has Israel's actions played into the Iranian leadership's hands?
Oh, I don't think at all. The Iranian regime is in a tight spot. Their surrogates, which Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthi even in Iraq and Syria, and in Gaza, have been seriously weakened in the last 2 years. The Iranian military conventionally is not capable of striking in a meaningful way Israel. They have missiles, which have been shown to be less effective so far than most had feared, although they can still strike and cause damage. And they don't have, they have the hostility of a vast majority of the Iranian population. So that gives them the IRGC and the people who control the weapons in Iran, buttressing the regime. They're in a tough spot. They can't do a lot, and their one remaining option is to become a nuclear weapons possessor, which is, nuclear weapons are viewed by many as the inoculation against invasion or regime change, because no one wishes to wrestle with a nuclear state. The stakes are so high. However, Iran doesn't have the weapon yet, which is why Israel is acting, and why India was constrained in its conflict with Pakistan recently. That's their one choice, one option now, the one card they have to play, which they are quite subtle themselves and intelligent and realize the risks. To do that may well bring actions by the United States and even more by Israel for regime change, and not to do it has put them in a far weakened position. So they don't have a lot of ways forward that are positive for them being the Iranian regime.
Nikolai, what role could Russia play in facilitating a de-escalation of this conflict? Of the major global powers, to what extent is Moscow best placed to do that?
Well, Moscow and Beijing are the two great powers that are viewed by the Iranian leadership as at least friendly states, and that they might play, well, either an intermediary role or to provide some guarantees if there is some kind of an agreement. And these are the two things that are quite essential under the current circumstances. And also, I believe that if there is an agreement, Russia and China will be the key players in rebuilding the Iranian economy, because we need to remember that the Israelis are now actually striking energy industry in Iran. And this might be quite damaging, because Iran was already suffering. And believe me, the real threat to this current government will come after the conflict, when they will have to struggle the economic damage caused by the Israeli strikes. And that will be the major issue. And only after that we will see whether this government will survive or not. But in the meantime, well, Israel and the U.S. are key players, and we could see that the U.S. was providing ammunition to the Israelis, and they had plenty of it. And I think that Israelis will not stop until they decide that Iran is not a source of danger. And until that moment, we will not see any progress on the diplomatic side of this crisis. Okay. But after we see real negotiations, then perhaps major powers could do some, could provide some help, but not before that. We can see, from the Russian perspective, we can see that both sides of the conflict are still willing to continue the fight. No one's prepared to stop it at the moment.
All right, but Bahrain, the question that I put to Glenn a few minutes ago, when I said, you know, to what extent has Israel played into the regime's hands in Iran, the government's hands there, I was hoping he might have said, well, they could quickly come to the table, agree a nuclear deal, save themselves and save their nuclear program. Where did Turkey stand on Iran's nuclear ambitions, given its dual relationships with both the US as a NATO ally and, of course, Iran, its regional neighbor and trading partner?
For Turkey, Iran's nuclear program at this moment does not pose an existential threat. If Iran were to weaponize its nuclear program, however, then that would change the game, and it might, down the road, force Turkey to consider developing nuclear weapons. There is vehement opposition within Ankara, however, that of becoming a pariah state in world affairs of the sort that Iran is going through right now, and North Korea has become further, and the way that Pakistan has faced massive international sanctions. So there's a lot of opposition to that notion of Turkey developing its own nuclear weapons. So far, Turkey has, since the negotiations in the Obama years have started, and then resulted in the nuclear deal of 2015, which President Trump then got out of in 2018. There's been support to go back to that, to a version of that deal where Iran agrees to inspections, pledges that it will not try to weaponize its nuclear program. It will not enrich uranium beyond a certain point, and would allow inspections to continue. That's more or less the Turkish position, Andrew.
Okay. Glenn, we talked earlier about perhaps China being the biggest geopolitical loser in this conflict. None of what's happening right now will have come as any surprise to China. It's bound to have made contingency plans for this situation, right? You'd think so. It has considerable military power. If this conflict does widen, would the current tension, do you think, force it to project at least some of that in the region, at least to preserve its huge economic and trade interests here?
I don't think so. Its primary interests are really about low-cost energy supplies, and it's, I think, by far the largest purchaser of Iranian petroleum. I don't think that China has never shown the interest or inclination in projecting its military power in the way you describe, which is more how the Americans have done it for decades, and Russia more recently has been doing it that way. But they will certainly try to stop, I think, regime change and such destruction that Iran's capabilities in the petroleum sector would be seriously damaged and world prices would rise. Beyond that, China, I don't think, is likely to do too much, because the costs diplomatically, economically, strategically for China, or the uncertainties at least, of projecting power by starting to become an overt provider of weapons and military support to Iran in this crisis would provide benefits to China. Really, I see that as not likely at present.
Gentlemen, there we must end it. Many thanks indeed. Marin Kayaoğlu, Glenn Carl, and Nikolai Sukhov. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again at any time by going to the website. You'll find that at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on X. Our handle there is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finnegan, and the team here in Doha. We'll see you again. Bye for now.
military operations in history. Operation Rising Lion. The Islamic regime, which has oppressed you for nearly 50 years,
he's live for us in Tehran, and Tahir, a little over an hour ago now, 2 hours ago, Israel said that it was striking Iran again.
Is to remove this threat, the nuclear threat and the ballistic missile threat to Israel. And as we achieve our objectives, we're also clearing the path for you to achieve your objective, which is freedom. In the past 24 hours, we've taken out top military commanders, senior nuclear scientists, the Islamic regime's most significant and a large portion of its ballistic missile arsenal. More is on the way. The regime doesn't know what hit them. They don't know what will hit them.
present, the Iranian authorities are informing us of attacks on two other facilities, namely the Forno fuel and liquid plant and the Isfahan, where fuel plate fabrication plant, a fuel manufacturing plant, uranium facility, which
In today's complex operating environment, filled with geopolitical uncertainty, increasing competitive pressure,
We partnered with Amazon to run a home delivery program all across King County.
This was my reaction when I found out Easy Fiber has 8 gig internet for $119. Easy Fiber has 5 gig internet for only $99 a month?
Watch out, guys. Watch out. The cameras. Coming through.
Where's that wagon at? How far is it down 11? We got a wagon over to 11th Street. We're going to walk up to you. Make sure they're okay, correct.
Goodwin. I am the founder of Groove Life. I used to be an Alaskan adventure guide, and all the belts that I had.
Musk deciding to go up against the U.S. president.
Informed opinions.
We are in times where resolutions, words, and positions matters not. France was shipping ammunition. The UK continues to send scraps of F-35s.
Critical debate.
The sanctions have failed to stop the war.
The problem is that quite a number of countries help Russia to bypass sanctions.
Inside Story on Al Jazeera.
Systemic omissions need to be called out.
When they broadcast news, it's parroting the government narrative.
Silence the press and the powerful go unchecked.
These are the stories that don't get told.
The Listening Post decodes the media on Al Jazeera.
We'll wake early today, my lovely, to see the sun rising over our Uzbekistan. I'll weave your hair for you beautifully, just like the roads that stretch further than you can see. The sun will smile on you. You'll see our glorious land, bathed in its golden rays. Open your heart and embrace the magic. Uzbekistan, crossroads of civilizations.
Welcome back, you're watching Al Jazeera, and here's a reminder of our top stories this hour. Israel and Iran are both threatening escalation. The two countries have been attacking each other with waves of missiles. Israeli strikes on Iran have killed more than 110 people, including women and children. The Israeli military says it's attacked an Iranian aircraft at an airport in Mashhad. The army says it struck a refueling plane and has described it as the most long-range strike since the start of its attacks.